Hi, this is Victor from Launch Excel. In today's episode, we're going to have a look at 4 ways to use VBA to find the last cell, row, or column in your Excel worksheet. So the first way is Range.SpecialCells. The second way is Range.End. The third way is Range.Find. And the fourth way is to create a user-defined function in VBA. So stick with me, and today we'll learn these 4 different ways. Right, and before we get started with the actual video tutorial, I got a quick announcement to make. When you finish watching this video, you want to read more detailed instructions to go with each of these different methods, then go to my blog post, because it's got a full VBA code there that you can use in your own macros, and the link to my blog post is in the description below the video, so check that out after you finish watching this video. Alright, let's check out special cells. So here I've got a sheet with a few rows of data in it, and I'm going to show you what this Range.SpecialCells does. And this is exactly the same as pressing Control and End on your keyboard. So I'm going to hit Control End now, and you see it takes me to cell D6. And if I hit Control and Home, it goes back to A1. So Range.SpecialCells is exactly the same as hitting Control and End, and I'll show you how to use it. It's pretty simple. I've just gone into the VBA editor with Alt F11, that's the keyboard shortcut. What I'll do is I'll specify range, I'll start with A1, the top left cell, and I'll type in .SpecialCells, press tab here, and Excel cell type I'll select all the way down to last cell, press tab, close the bracket, and I'll just select it, so .select. And now we'll go back into Excel with Alt F11, and we'll run that macro. I'll press Alt F8, and we'll see it's selected A_SpecialCells. I'll hit run, and it goes and selects cell D6. So that's just the same as using Control Home on the keyboard. And as a quick note, the last used cell is not the same thing as the last cell with data in it. So you see this D6 that has data in it, but I could change, say, cell F8 to the last used cell if I just right click in it and I select to increase the font size by 1. Now it doesn't look like there's anything in it, and the only thing that's changed is a bit of formatting. But when I go back to A1 and I run the macro again, Alt F8, and run, you'll see it didn't select that last cell with data in it, it selected F8. And it doesn't have any data in it, it just had the formatting changed. So using this special cells, if I go back to our the VBA editor, Alt F11, if you use this .SpecialCells, it will select the last used cell which Excel defines anything with a change made to it. And it can be useful if you go back in here. If I want to delete, let's say, that cell, I'm going to select E and F and hit Control- to delete. That means it should reset the last used cell. Instead of F8, it should be now D6. But it only refreshes the last used cell range if I save the file. So I hit Control-S now to save it. And I'll go back up to A1, hit F8, run that macro. Now it goes back and it selects D6. So when you press save, or you actually save in VBA, what Excel will do is reset the used cell range. But there's another way to do that. So if I go back into the VBA editor, if I say select this, I'll insert one line, I'll just write active sheet dot used range, and that line here, let's comment this out, that refreshes the used range. So you don't have to save it, you can just use active sheet or whatever sheet you're on .used range, and that will refresh the used range. So that was Range.SpecialCells. Use that to find the last used cell, and you can also use it to help remove unwanted unused cells. So cells with no data in them, just change the formatting. And it's actually the same as using Control and End on your keyboard. Now Range.Find, this searches single rows or columns, but the dataset must have no blank cells, and we'll see what this means very soon. So how does Range.End work? Let's have a look at this sheet again, and I'll explain using this graphic. So we assume that this is the worksheet we have. Let's say the last row in column A is 20. So what we'll do is this, starting here, we'll go all the way up and we'll stop there where there's some data in it. And the same thing for row 1. Let's assume column L is the very last column in this worksheet. So we start there and then we work all the way back left here to D1. And so column D in this case would be the last column in row 1 that has data in it. So what we'll do is I'll show you an equivalent. So that's how it looks like when you draw it out. But if I were to use keyboard shortcuts, basically go to the very last cell, I'm pressing Control down all the way, and then I press Control up arrow, and it brings me to cell A6. So that will be finding the last cell in column A with data in it. And the same over here, if I press Control right arrow, it will take me all the way to the right. And what this Range.End does is it emulates Control left arrow. So if I do Control left arrow, it will end me up in the column D with end date. And that's the same thing as what Range.End does. So just remember it as the same as the keyboard shortcuts, Control up and Control down, Control right and Control left. Let's have a look at the code now. So I've declared a couple of variables in this, and the first thing we'll do is we'll find the last non-blank cell in column A. So we've got this variable last underscore row for the last row, and last underscore column for the last column. Let's go find the last row. So last, let's delete that, last underscore row. We'll set that equals to, now cells, I'm going to specify the cell. I want to have the last cell here in column 1, which is column A. So rows.count, column 1. So that will count the total number of rows on the active sheet. I'll go .end, and I'll choose Excel up. I could choose Excel up, Excel down, same as pressing Control up arrow, Control down arrow. .row, enter. And now to find the last non-blank cell in row 1, we'll do the same thing but for columns. So last underscore column equals cells, and I'll choose a cell all the way to the right in row 1. So row 1, comma, and columns.count, close bracket, .end, and here I'll choose Excel to left. So that's the same as Control left arrow, and Excel to right would be the same as Control right arrow. And I'll specify the column number is what we want. And then this message box just outputs the last row with the last row number, and the last column with the last column number. So we'll head back into Excel. So we run with Alt F8, and we'll choose to run that first macro. And what this is output is the dialog box shows last row is 6, the last column is 4. So that's correct. The last row is 6 here, and the last column is 4. Now earlier we did mention in this overview that this Range.End searches single rows or columns, and the dataset must have no blank cells. So let's have a look at a dataset with blank cells, and we're going to run that same macro. Run. Now have a look at the output. It says the last row is 5 and the last column is 3. So the last row is 5 here, and the last column is 3. Why it did that was it went all the way to the last cell here, and it went up, and it found the last non-blank cell is A5. It went all the way to the right and left there, and it found the last non-blank cell was C1. So in this case, because there were blanks in the data set, it didn't find the actual last row and column that we'd expect it to find. So there's a bit of a warning, and it would be okay if you had a data set like this, but if you have a data set with blanks in it, be careful if you use this method. So the third option we have is to use Range.Find. Now that searches the entire range or sheet, and it's okay with blank cells in the data set. So let's have a look at how this works. It's a little bit like using the Find and Replace dialog box. So here is the Find and Replace dialog box in Excel. I just pressed Control F to bring that up. And basically what we're doing is we're finding an asterisk. And asterisk means any character in the cell. We're searching in the sheet by rows and formulas. We don't need to match case, we don't need to match the entire cell contents. So I press Find Next, it will just jump to the next cell that meets this criteria. So we're doing something very similar in VBA. So here is the sub. The purpose of this range find last row is to find the last non-blank row on the active sheet. And there's a variable declaration. I'm going to call it last underscore row as before. And there's two lines here. One is to set the last row using cells.find, and the other one is a message box output the last row. And I just noticed a misspelling here, so I'm going to correct that. Last row. Right, so the cells.find, if I go inside the brackets and I press Control I, that will bring up the information. What we'll see is these different parameters. And we're going to use the first one, the what, second one, the after, the third one, the look in, fourth one, look at, fifth one the search order, and the sixth one search direction. Now it sounds quite a lot, but it will be useful to enter all of these in, because every time you do a find, it's going to default to whatever was searched for before. If you don't specify each of these parameters, then it's going to just use what was last used, which may not be what you want. So it's important to specify each of these parameters when you write this. I'll start with the what. So what we'll do is an asterisk. That's the wildcard character, comma. So I'm going to do an underscore and hit the next line. So I'll do it after, and I'll specify after range A1, because we want to start at the top left. And then we'll go look in. So what we do for look in is we're going to look into the Excel formulas. Excel formulas. And look at, we don't want to look at the whole cell, we just look at the part of the cell. So anything that matches just even a part of the cell will be fine. And a search order we will specify as Excel by rows, because we want to search by rows. And then search direction, we want to specify that to be Excel previous. So instead of looking for the next one, we want to look for the previous one. And at the end of that, we'll type in .row. And there we have the VBA code that we can use. So I'm going to press Alt F11 and head back into Excel, and I'll run that macro, Alt F8 and run. We'll see that it outputs the last row is 6. So that's nice because it found the last row here. I'm going to switch to the other spreadsheet now, the other worksheet, the one with missing data in. I'm going to run the macro again, and you'll see this time it found the last row is 6 as well. And I'll show you briefly what it's doing if I just draw this out. It starts with cell A1, and the reason it finds this instead of getting affected by the blanks is it starts in cell A1, it goes backwards all the way back to the last cell, and then it searches by row, so it goes all the way down this row, it can't find anything, it goes then to the next row up, and it can't find anything, and it keeps searching each row until it gets to a row like this one here, where it finds, oh yes, there's a cell with some data in it, and it returns that row number. So in this case it's 6. So that's why it's okay with blanks in your data set. So if we wanted to find the last non-blank column on the active sheet instead of the last non-blank row, we just switch out row for column. So here we've got last underscore column, we declare that as a variable, and we set last underscore column to be equal to cells.find, same what, same after, same look in, same look at. We'll just change the search order. Instead of searching Excel by rows, we search Excel by columns. Same search direction, we're going to go to Excel previous. So not the next occurrence, but the previous occurrence. And we specify dot column, and then we'll have a message box that says last column is, then the last column number. So that's how you do last non-blank columns. So that was using Range.Find to search the entire range or sheet, and it's okay with blank cells in the dataset. Now, quick intermission. If you like the video so far, please hit the like button below. It means a lot to me and will encourage me to create more videos like this one, so hit the like button. And you can also download the accompanying workbook from my blog post. This has got all the VBA code in it, so you don't have to write it out yourself. You can copy and paste into your own workbooks. So make sure to check the link to my blog post below. It's in the video description. Right, so the last thing we'll have a look at today is user-defined function. So creating a user-defined function means you can write anything you want to. You can create it how you want it to work. In this case, I've created one which can specify the last cell or row or column, depending on what parameter you put in. And you can also use this in the worksheet formula, not just in VBA. You can actually use this on a worksheet. And I'll show you both these things very soon. So here's a function. I've called it find last, capital F, capital L. And there's 3 parameters for this. First is search type, which is a string. The second one is optional, so you don't have to specify this. And this is str for string underscore worksheet. So that allows you to specify the worksheet name. And again, the third is optional. So this third parameter is str underscore range, again a string. So that's to specify the range address. So the purpose of this find last is to find the last row, column, or cell in the specified worksheet and range, depending on what you specify as a search type. So parameters are row, col, and cell. And I'll just take you through how this works. So the first thing you'll see is I've declared some variables. The important part here, this first part is the important part. I'm going to default to the active sheet if the worksheet's not specified, And I'm going to default to all cells if the range isn't specified, which is why these two parameters up here are optional. So what happens is, if the string worksheet is not specified, if it's just a blank, then what we'll do is we'll set this worksheet underscore search to be the active sheet. Otherwise, we'll set the worksheet underscore search to be worksheets specified by the string worksheet, that name that we put in as a parameter, and then we end if. So that allows us to default to the active sheet if we don't specify a worksheet, or we set the worksheet to be the name that we put in the parameter. Now we also want to default to all cells if the range isn't specified. So instead of just searching an unknown, we'll search for all cells. If the parameter number 3, this str underscore range, is blank, what it does is sets the RNG search, so range search, to be equal to the worksheet.search. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Worksheet.search, worksheet underscore search even, dot cells, so all the cells in the current worksheet to search. Otherwise, we'll set the range underscore search to be equal to the range, so the worksheet underscore search dot range string underscore range, and end if. So that does the defaulting to the active sheet. This one does the defaulting to all cells. You'll notice as well, briefly I'll mention this, on error go to error handler. What happens is, if you're trying to set the worksheet search or the range search and there's an error, you don't want the program to just throw a spanner and say, oh, I don't know what to do. This instead tells it to go to the error handler, and the error handler is down here. So the error handler just says message box. In this case, very simple. I'm just going to output the message error setting the worksheet or range and leave it up to the user to do something next. Right, so there is the first part. Let's have a look at the second part. So this is the interesting part. What we'll do is we'll select case. So depending on what the user put in as the search type, either the row or the column or the cell, it will jump to the case row or case column or case cell. What I'm doing here is on error resume next, so that it just keeps going if there's an error. What we'll do is find last, so we'll set the output of the function to be equal to RNG underscore search, and this is exactly the same as method 3 we had to look at before. We had the Range.Find. We're doing exactly the same thing. We're looking for an asterisk, which is the wildcard character to search for any character. We're looking after, in this case, we'll look after the first cell in the range underscore search.cells. And we'll look in Excel formulas, we'll look at Excel part. The Excel search order, is Excel by rows. And the search direction is Excel previous, just like before. And we'll find the row. So what that does is it returns the last row with data in it, and it outputs that in the function find last. And then it leaves this and it ends the function down here. If I just scroll down a little bit. So at that point, it would go end select and then exit function. On the other hand, if the user specified they wanted to search for columns, it would come to this point and the search type would be column, would go down to case column, and then it would find the last column, so it would set the function output to be equal to range underscore search.find. So just the same as before, we're doing range.find. We'll search for any character with this asterisk wildcard. We'll search after range search.cells 1, so the first cell in our search range. And then we'll go look in the formulas. We'll look at Excel part cell, not the whole cell. And we'll do a search order by columns, and the search direction is previous. So just like option 3 before, we're going to do the same thing and return the column number. So then after it finishes this, it would exit the function. Now, if the user decided to specify the cell instead of the row or column, the only difference here is that I'm combining last row and last column. So we first find the last row and then we find the last column using the range.find. And afterwards we combine that in the find last. So find last is set to be worksheet underscore search.cells, and we open bracket last row, comma, last column, close bracket, dot address. And that will return the address of the last row and last cell in that search range. I've put in false, comma, false here because I don't want to return the absolute reference, just the relative reference. So the row will be relative and the column will be relative. What I mean by that is instead of outputting, say, $A, $10, which is the absolute method, it will just output A10. And so there is the way we use this, combining the last row and the last column into the find last here. So the find last returns that address. Now, a little bit of error handling here. If the error number is greater than 0, that means there's an error. What we'll do is we'll set find last to be equal to the range_search.cells1.address. So we'll just return the first cell in the search range, just in case the whole sheet is blank, in which case there's an error when you run this. It will not error out, it will just return the address of that first cell, and then it clears the error. Right, so that's how the VBA function looks like. Let's have a look at it in action. So a quick example of using it in VBA. I've got this sub last_row_ example, and I'm just going to declare one variable, last_row. We'll find the last row and then output it in the message box. So the last row, we'll set that equal to, and here's the function name, find last, open bracket. I'm going to specify it in the inverted commas, row, so that's the string that specifies I want the row, not the column or the cell, comma. So the second parameter I'm going to set as worksheet table, and the third parameter I'll just leave as blank. So remember, we have 3 parameters. The first specifies what kind of search we're looking for, the second the worksheet, and the third the range. And if any of these parameters are blank, either the worksheet or the range is going to go to the default values. So that's a simple example of how you use it for the row. And let's go into Excel. If I go into Excel, Alt F11, I'm going to choose this table worksheet. The last cell is basically this one, F14. The last row will be 14. If I go run with Alt F8 and I go last row example, run that, it will output the last row as 14. So that's basically how you use it in VBA. Now you can also use it on the worksheet. So let's have a look at this. I've got this formula here. It actually says equals find last, which is our custom function. I've open bracket C3, C4, C5. And so it's specifying each of the parameters using values on this worksheet. So C3, C4, C5, what this does is it finds the last cell on this sheet table and in the range A1 to D24. So A1 to D24, from here to here, last cell with any data in it is actually cell D14, and that's the result that's produced here. So D14 is that cell here. It's the last cell in this range that has data in it. So we can do the same thing for rows. Let's say we wanted to use find last. In this case, D3 is row, D4 is the same worksheet table, D5 is the range A1 to D24. Or we could do columns by specifying COL, or we could do cell. So with the find last function, you can either use it in your VBA programs, or you can use it on a worksheet, which is pretty versatile, and you can select row or column or cell. So a quick recap, we looked at 4 different ways to use VBA to find the last cell, row or column, including this very handy custom user-defined function that you can even use in your worksheet formulas. Now let me ask you a question. Since you're learning how to write macros in VBA, have you ever struggled to get a quick overview of key topics in Excel macros in VBA? Well, look no further, because I've created these special one-page cheat sheets that will help you. When I was learning Excel VBA over 10 years ago, I wish I had these quick reference guides for those little things I couldn't remember. So I created these special one-page cheat sheets, and you can get your own copies. If you head down to the video description below, you'll find a link to these Excel VBA cheat sheets. You can get them instantly. So these are very handy. You can print them out, you can keep them on your computer. They cover several key topics, such as general Excel VBA and Excel VBA shortcuts, decisions and loops, and more. So check the link in the description below. Plus, if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click the little bell icon to be notified as soon as a new video comes out. You can also subscribe to my free Excel newsletter to get the latest updates on my blog. The link for that is in the video description as well. And one last thing, if you want to read the detailed instructions that go with this video and get a copy of the VBA code in the sample workbook that accompanies the video, head over to my blog post. Again, the link is in the description below the video. Thanks for watching Launch Excel, and have a great day.